Hello and welcome into the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. I'm National Recruiting Analyst Petagna alongside 24/7 Sports Director of Scouting, Andrew Ivins. We got a great show for you today. Busy week. We got a ton of commitments to get to. The SEC staying busy, Miami as well. What's going on with Cormani McClain? We're going to talk about the top quarterback receiver trios in 2025 and a lot more to get to as well. But Drew, I got to ask, have you budgeted for EA Sports College Football 25? Because I had the conversation with my wife. I was not prepared. These are things that I think when you get over the age of 30, you got to figure out a little bit. I have severe FOMO. I have not played the game yet. It's been over 10 years. I'm just kind of one of those guys right now. I'm kind of foaming at the mouth a little bit. Did you have a plan coming into yesterday?
Well, I don't have the game yet, right? Because I'm not smart enough to pre-order. So I'm like everyone else waiting on the 19th Thursday. Coop, but I'm going to give you a secret. I told my wife that 24/7 Sports was sending me a new console, so we needed to play it for the show. So bam, there you go. She thinks that the company's sending me one. So hopefully on Thursday, I'm still deciding Xbox or PS5, and I have taken to the message boards, Reddit, trying to figure out which console is better. Still don't have an answer. Look, I just want to play EA Sports 25, potentially online against you. Maybe Grand Theft Auto 6 whenever that comes out or whatever edition of it is. But I don't have a lot of spare time. So no, I don't have the game yet, but I have FOMO.
I was about to say, it's not in the contract. I'm trying to figure out is like, all right, if we find a way to play it, whether it be at like your friend's house or whatever, even though that's kind of not what you do on the weekends anymore, go hang out at your friend's house and play college football. It might be better. Might earn some brownie points with the wife. So we'll see what happens there. Yeah.
You know what? I'm just such a nerd. What I want to do, like everyone's like, oh, I'm playing these games. Like I just want to power through a dynasty and then get into the transfer portal and try to grab as many guys that we ranked last cycle, right? Like my freshman class or would-be sophomore class is going to be loaded with guys. Like I'm using all my NIL money, going to go get a good quarterback. That's what I want to do because that's what I am, roster management.
I feel like your team would be USF. Is that right?
Oh, FAU, baby.
FAU.
I don't know, but UCF, I saw UCF. I mean, I'm in Orlando. We could watch rockets shoot off from NASA all the time. Apparently, if you're playing with the Knights in the middle of a night game, a rocket could shoot off. I think that's a pretty cool touch from those guys at EA Sports.
All right, Drew, let's talk some ball. I talked about a busy week and a lot going on in the world, a lot going on in college football as well, especially in recruiting. And guys, like I always say, make sure to keep it locked into the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, the Oyster Boys. We got you covered. Make sure to like and subscribe. And if you have some questions a little bit later in the show, we'll get to those as well. Make sure to put them in the chat. But Drew, over the weekend, you and I were talking along with producer Aaron about a couple of ideas. And one topic that came up was, hey, who's got the best group of quarterback, receiver kind of pairings and trios and guys that have kind of stuck out so far in 2025? And the top receivers are kind of flying off the board right now. And we'll talk about a couple of those guys, but just in the last couple of weeks, you think about C.J. Wiley to Florida State, you think about Caleb Cunningham to Alabama, Travis Smith off the board over the weekend to Tennessee as well. It's kind of been a natural lead into this conversation about, all right, who's going to be that next duo, trio at the quarterback and the receiver position that's going to dominate. I believe you're putting some words together right now in an article that is published, should be published relatively soon for CBS Sports. But Drew, in your eyes, let's start at the top, right? I mean, one of the best recruiting teams over the last 17 years, and quite honestly, I wouldn't say a shocker, but somewhat of a surprise that they've exceeded expectations so far in Kalen DeBoer, the number 2 ranked recruiting class in the country. They had a big weekend, added 2 5-stars in Ty Haywood and Caleb Cunningham. But let's stick with the wideout. You look at this trio, Keelan Russell, a guy that we rocketed up our board, the number 10 player in the country, number 3 arm. You got Caleb Cunningham, a guy that we like, a top 32 player at the position. And then you got Latsir Brooks, a guy that maybe a lot of people who watch this show don't know a lot about, but a spark plug guy out of the state of New Jersey. Drew, this is the first team for you that kind of came to mind when you were kind of putting this thought process together. Why do you like Alabama so much, their future quarterback receiver connection?
Yeah, I mean, let's kind of set the stage for the story, the exercise a little bit better. Brett Greenberg, who covers Alabama for the 24/7 Sports Network, he texts me Saturday morning, a few hours before Caleb Cunningham commits to the Crimson Tide. I think that caught some people off guard, but Alabama had been working it behind the scenes. And he goes, all right, Keelan Russell, you guys love him. You're number 3 quarterback right now. Now you're pairing him with the number 3 wide receiver in the top 247 and Caleb Cunningham. Is this the best quarterback wide receiver duo in the class of 2025? And I thought about it. And I think I even put it in our, scouting team chat. And it really got the mind thinking, okay, is there a duo? Is there a trio we like, right? You see these guys in the rankings and, they're slotted in certain neighborhoods, potential round 1, potential round 2. But, like, who are you buying stock in? And for me, yeah, Alabama, I certainly am what this passing attack could be at some point down the line. You want to talk about frequent flyer miles? Caleb Cunningham, Keelan Russell, they're going to have them. Cooper, we continue to talk about Keelan Russell. I know some people poking at us about saying we just moved him up in the rankings because he flipped from SMU to Alabama. This kid would have been ranked the number 3 quarterback regardless of where he was going to go to school. We like him. He's an efficient passer, and I think pairing him with Caleb Cunningham, that's a bit of a cheat code. Caleb Cunningham, to me, a run-after-catch menace. He's a bouncy athlete, really good in contested catch situations. I like that duo. You mentioned Latsier Brooks. This is a guy that has set records there in New Jersey, and I think Alabama, you also have to remember Ryan Williams was a member of the class of 2025. He reclassified the 5-star wide receiver. We're going to see him on TV screens this upcoming fall. So, yeah, I'm buying stock in Alabama's offense, knowing what Kalen DeBoer wants to do. He wants to air it out. I think the potential trio of Keelan Russell, Caleb Cunningham, Latsier Brooks, you want to throw Ryan Williams in there as well, it gets me excited.
All right, I want to ask you a question because we've talked a lot about the 2024 receiver class, and often the question comes, where does DeCorian Moore, the number 1 receiver in the country, currently committed to Oregon, where does he fit in that conversation? We had that conversation not too long ago. We haven't really talked about where does Khalil Lockett fit? Where does Caleb Cunningham fit? Where do guys like Derek Meadows fit? And Drew, I kind of want to go back on you. Caleb Cunningham is a really interesting guy. We know that Mississippi, I don't want to say is a difficult place to scout and evaluate, but a lot of the time you were dealing with information, important pieces of information that are missing in that process. Caleb Cunningham is one of those guys that we've never seen run. In terms of the in-person evaluation, it's been limited. And then there's some things about Caleb Cunningham. He's listed at 6'3". I think we got a official verified height at around 6 foot and 3/4, 190 pounds. Drew, he's got production on the field over 1,100 yards receiving. He's also got 14 touchdowns. He's got the background in track and field as well. Long jump, high jump, triple jump, basketball. He scored over 1,000 points on the hardwood as well, over 1,500 points, and he averaged 18 points per game. There is a lot of additional data points that get you really excited about Caleb Cunningham. There's a little hunch in me that's still like, there's a little bit, I don't want to call it doubt, but there's a little shred of something when I put my head on the pillow where like, man, am I missing something with this guy? And the reason that I bring up Caleb Cunningham, it's not so much him as it just kind of compares to the 2024 class. When you go down the list and you look at guys like Jeremiah Smith, Cam Coleman, Ryan Williams, TJ Moore, Micah Hudson, Gatlin Bair, Ryan Wingo, Perry Thompson, Micah Matthews, Courtney Crutchfield. The list kind of goes on and on and on with guys that were multi-sport athletes that we had verified exposure to. Courtney Cunningham's a little bit different in terms of where we are in the process before his senior season. It's one of those things I kind of think about, like where would this guy kind of fit if you were to put him in that crop of receivers last year?
Oh, Coop, that's a fair question. And I think to our listeners, our viewers, they're not surprised to hear you say that. We've kind of had our hand up in the air really for the past few months. This wide receiver class, we really don't know yet. I'll say this, though, Coop. I think the wide receiver board, that picture is kind of coming into focus, and that's because we've gotten more live exposure points to the Jamie Frenches of the world, the Jerome Miles, the Vernell Browns, the Donovan Olabodes, the Quincy Porters. We've seen these guys more and more. You brought up that 2024 group. It is a talented, I think, maybe potentially generational type of wide receivers. A lot of those guys are going to be selected early on in the NFL draft if they can avoid setbacks and keep progressing. Here in 2025, we just haven't got a ton of live hands-on exposure to some of them. And Coop, if me and you were going to like start a camp series in the offseason, I think stop number one is somewhere in Mississippi. Heck, let's do 2 stops there because it seems like there's just not a ton of events there. And that's not Caleb Cunningham's fault. He hasn't made it out to an Atlanta or over to Texas for a camp. But that's kind of one of the reasons, we're kind of uncertain, right? We just haven't got that final piece to the evaluation puzzle, being the eyes-on exposure points, seeing him against other top-ranked prospects or guys that we think are pretty good. Thankfully, hopefully, fingers crossed, we're going to see him in the Alabama-Mississippi All-Star game, and then again, either at the Under Armour All-American game or the All-American Bowl. So, yeah, I think you're right. Where would I rank him compared to the guys in 2024? I don't know. He's probably closer to 10 than he is number 1. But the other thing is with 2024, we saw TJ Moore in San Antonio give defensive backs fits. We saw Courtney Crutchfield extend plays and create separation, snapping off corners there. So it's a little bit different, but I think you're right. With these wide receivers, he's one of the ones where we just haven't, not lack of information. He's in that 5-star range. He's held a 5-star grade, but he's kind of one of those ones where it's like priority watch. Got to see what we can learn from him this fall, and then hopefully in the winter months.
And it's why we talk about Alabama, Mississippi, that All-Star game, which this year will be in Mobile. It's a huge exposure every single year. I remember a couple years ago, you got Kelby Collins, Peter Woods, Keldrick Falk, just loaded with talent, especially on that defensive line. As we try to sort that out, Caleb Cunningham, we'll see if we get to see him this fall, but certainly one of the most talented receivers in the country. All right, Drew, let's stick in the SEC. How about Georgia? We don't really typically talk about their receiving core and what they have. Talked a lot about Ryan Montgomery on this show, committed to the Georgia Bulldogs out of the state of Ohio. And if you haven't heard much about him, he's an ideal fit for Georgia and what they want to do. And I think a lot of people kind of thought, all right, this is a guy that you can plug and play, and he'll move the chains. He'll keep you ahead of the sticks. He'll play behind that big, gigantic wall in Athens on that offensive line. They'll lean on the running game. I think, Drew, you and I and the rest of the team came away from the Elite 11 finals super impressed, not only with the performance of Ryan Montgomery, but just maybe the discounted upside as well. So Ryan Montgomery certainly a name to look forward to, but the guys that he's going to be playing with, how about Talon Taylor, Tyler Williams, 2 guys that you're really familiar with, but let's start with Talon Taylor. Drew, just your thoughts on him and what he gives that Georgia receiving room, maybe something that they don't have right now.
Coop, we're calling this a trio, right, with Montgomery and Taylor and Tyler Williams, but Georgia's got 4 wideouts committed, and we're big fans, I think, of all of them, right? Landon Rowland, who recently tested for them, camped for them, and then jumped on board. To me, when I look at Talon Taylor, I look at Tyler Williams, I see 2 explosive route runners. They're different molds in terms of the body complexion, but they're both very good at creating separation at the 2nd and 3rd levels. We know Georgia, their identity on offense is it's ground and pound, right? They're going to run the football. They're going to work off of play action. To me, Ryan Montgomery is the guy that can throw these receivers open, not just at the intermediate level, but in the deeper parts of the field. And, Georgia, as good as they have been, and they've sent some wide receivers to the NFL, it's kind of been that position room, not an Achilles heel, but they've had to go through the transfer portal to supplement it with talent. They haven't had the answer when it comes to high school recruiting. I think if you're a Georgia fan, there's absolutely reason to be excited about the combination of Talon Taylor and Tyler Williams based upon what we have seen from them this offseason. Talon Taylor, guy that was dinged up there as a junior, he was awesome at the OT7 finals. And then Tyler Williams, as a junior, he caught passes from a quarterback that signed to play defensive back at Florida. So, right, he didn't have the best, quarterback situation. He still averaged over 22 yards per catch. That is a green number when you're scouting wide receivers. So I like these 2, Cooper. I know have you seen Talon Taylor in person, or is that more of just going through the camp footage?
No, I haven't, and a name that kind of came up a little bit, I think, was Roman Wilson. He's a little bit bigger, but the reason I kind of bring up that name is just his ability to kind of get in and out of breaks. He's a really, really sticky route runner. I think the ability to create consistent separation, you saw that with Ladd McConkey, how much of an advantage that was for a Georgia passing attack last year with Carson Beck and over the last 2 years with Stetson Bennett. So Talon Taylor certainly bringing that skill set. The other thing, Drew, that I find interesting, both these guys, they didn't eclipse over 600 yards last year receiving, and some might look at that and say, well, how are they so highly ranked? I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Talon Taylor only played 6 games, had an injury the second half of the season. And then with Tyler Williams, you brought up the fact that his quarterback is really a defensive back, right? Tyler Williams, to me, Drew, I kind of want to hear you volley on him a little bit. I heard you talk about him, but this is one of those guys, I think, as you get ready for the senior season, you and I and the rest of the scouting team, we always look at the guys like who are the priority watch, like who can make that leap from their junior to their senior season. He's an super intriguing guy, shade under 6'1", almost 210 pounds, big physical receiver. The other thing about him, had 5 return either kickoffs or punt returns as well. So his run after catch ability is certainly something that comes to mind. I don't think he's going to be a day one impact guy, Drew, but like 2 years from now, if this kid gets it right, this is like one of those kind of wild card recruitments that could pay off big time for Georgia.
Absolutely, Cooper. I think you are on the head. I was going to bring up the return stuff, right? We go back to the 2024 NFL draft. All those wide receivers that came off the board early, they all were special teams aces in high school. I think it's something you need to look for when you're scouting wide receivers. Are these guys return men? And more importantly, do they get into the end zone? Tyler Williams does just that, Coop. Going into the next gen, the comp I have for him, and I don't know if you're going to agree with this one, Javon Baker, who was at UCF, ended up getting selected in this most recent NFL draft. Another vertical threat. And at first glance, you don't think these guys are the ones that are going to be streaking 40, 50 yards down the field, just kind of given how big they are. But Tyler Williams can do just that. Coop, the other thing on Georgia before we move on, how about the 2 tight ends they got committed? Elias Williams, Ethan Barber, Todd Hartley. We know what he's been able to do with that position. Like, this might not be a trio. We're talking about 5 or 6 options here. I think just the story with Georgia is they are adding some pass catchers that can certainly elevate that passing attack.
All right, I know it's Tuesday. I know most people probably have a sick day today and are at home playing video games, which rightfully so, and you're probably wiping your eyes, and it's a little bit of a late start. But college football recruiting never sleeps, so make sure to like and subscribe, get in the chat, get active. We got 40 people watching right now. Those are rookie numbers. We got to pump those numbers up. Drew, let's continue to talk about another team in the SEC, Missouri. And it starts with Matt Zollers, a guy that we really like. We've kind of compared him just in terms of the developmental timeline to a guy like Luke Kromenhoek. If you follow the show, you should know who that is. But another guy that ended up in the top 40 last year in the rankings, signed with FSU. And Drew, what I mean by that is, this guy's got all the physical traits that I think everybody desires in the quarterback position. He's going to need a little bit of seasoning, a little bit of polish. He's going to have to add some weight to his frame. That's okay. Missouri invested in the right guy here, but let's talk about 2 guys that we really like that are actually pretty different. Donovan Alabode, a guy that we really like out of the state of Illinois, playing his football at IMG Academy. Beauty in the eye of the beholder, we always talk about that, but Drew, I think something happened over the last couple months. We got eyes on this guy. Big physical kid, shade under 6'2", 200 pounds plus. He seems bigger than that. He's got 35-plus inch arms, which is just elite length for a receiver, and 11-inch hands. I mean, some of the biggest hands that I think I've seen at the receiver position over the last couple of years. They pair him with a guy like Javen Boggs that I think is pound for pound one of the most productive receivers in the country. If you want to compare him to a guy maybe a couple years ago, Jaden Greathouse kind of comes to mind. They're not the same, but in terms of production, high floor, guy that can get on the field early. Boggs out of Cocoa in Florida. Drew, like Missouri, the infusion of what they're adding, not only at the quarterback position with Zollers, but at the receiver position. These 2 are very complimentary of each other, but you got to love what Eli Drinkowitz has done here.
Well, Luther Burden, Missouri has him for 1 more season. What happens after that? I think everyone in the SEC that has had to face the Tigers is probably like, okay, this passing attack has to take a step back. But I don't think that's going to be the case. You mentioned Courtney Crutchfield a little bit earlier, top 64 player for us, All-American. He signs with Missouri. Now they're following it up with a really good quarterback who has a ton of developmental upside, a guy that can get the ball from point A to point B, a gritty, tough competitor, accurate on the move. And then these 2 wide receivers, you said they're a little bit different, but they're kind of carbon copies of each other. Both of them right under 6'1", both of them 200 pounds, both of them with elite short shuttle times. I think Boggs and Olabode are just technicians with their feet. They find ways to get open. And to me, just knowing what Missouri wants to do on offense, these are guys that are going to get a high volume of targets. So I think anyone that's got Missouri on the schedule in the coming years, like that passing attack isn't going away just because Luther Burden is going to be, on your fantasy football team as a rookie. These guys are coming along and they're going to be ready to go. Jalen Boggs, I didn't even realize this. This is throw up a tag flag on me. Florida 3S or M Player of the Year. He set some records there at Cocoa High School, catching passes from Brady Hart. Olabode, expecting a big senior season for him. Ty Hawkins, the SMU quarterback commit, he transfers into IMG Academy. So 2 names certainly to know. And Missouri still hunting for pass. Alfred also have Sean Terry committed. It's a really talented group.
It shocked me when we got the official height weight back on Olabode. Not so much the weight. He's got such a physical frame, but I thought he'd be at least 6'2" plus. You brought it up. I mean, him and Boggs really aren't kind of that different, I guess. Really how I see Olabode kind of more X receiver, kind of playing on the perimeter. Boggs, a guy that can slide inside.
I'm not pushing back. 6'1", 200 pounds can look a lot of different ways. All right, I think some listeners out here would agree with that as well.
No, I think you make a good point. I'm not pushing back on you. I'm just saying skill set wise, a little bit different. All right, Drew, 2 other programs that you were writing about. How about Arizona, right? We saw Robert McDaniel, the 3-star quarterback commit in LA, the late addition after George McIntyre, the Tennessee commit, was out due to injury in a late scratch. McDaniel's certainly a guy that our guys are excited about. Greg Biggins excited about, did some really good things in LA. But Drew, how about Terry Shelton and another guy, Isaiah Mazzell, from there in the state of Florida? But let's start with Shelton. What a super intriguing kid. 6'3", 200. The college feedback on this kid has been really, really good. And I would say that, we always talk about, hey, how do we avoid that word? But there is a lot of curiosity. There's a lot of quote-unquote intrigue when it comes to a guy like Terry Shelton. A lot of people sniffing around. And the production on the field was okay, right? Over 600 yards receiving. And then outside of that, had 8 touchdowns as well. But this is another guy, we talked about Caleb Cunningham, his background on the hardwood earlier in the show, that has over 1,000 career points, 800 rebounds on the hardwood, the individual workouts as well. Drew, he's kind of opened some eyes. You pair him with a guy like Mazzell, the brother of Aiden Mazzell, now at Florida, was a top 247 receiver for us in 2023. Maybe it wasn't the cleanest comparison between Olabode and a guy like Boggs last time. But these two, I would say, different, right, in terms of what they offer. And Mazzell, a guy, 10'4'9", good run after catch ability, can stretch the field as well. The Shelton kid, Drew, is just kind of like a baby deer. And you can tell he's starting to get his legs under him. He's starting to get a better feel for the game. He seems like a basketball player that's playing football. But you see all those basketball traits on the football field, and that gets you really, really excited about what this kid could be.
Coop, this was my wild card when I put the list together, and I'm sure you look at the rankings, you're like, okay, how do you love this trio? We're talking about 3-3-star prospects. We watch a lot of tape, okay? This is the one that gets me fired up as it came together. Robert McDaniel, we didn't know much about him coming into the Elite 11 finals. You said it, last second ad, local kid. You know what? He comes out and he looks like one of the top quarterbacks. I would have put him in the top half. He wasn't in the final 11 for us, but he could have been 12, 13, 14, 15. It was a really solid showing for him. Terry Shelton, this is my guy, right? I am so in on Terry Shelton. I'm buying all the stock I can. Talked to a college staffer. They said the workout they saw from him back during the spring months was one of the best they've ever seen. And I don't know if he was just pulling my leg, but it made me dig back into the tape. They're comparing him to T-Mac there. Isaiah Mazzell, this guy is, 10-minute drive for me. I'm falling more and more in love with him. He is a true vertical threat. You said the 10'4'9". His brother was dinged up. His brother was a top 247 recruit. He had a good spring game at Florida. Mom was an All-American sprinter there in Gainesville. I think he's one where he's going to get out of the state of Florida, right? And a few years from now, everyone's going to be wondering, scratching their head, okay, how did Florida's big three not go in on Mazzell? And I know he's slight of frame, but his ability to race down the sidelines, it's some of the best I've seen. 22 touchdowns. Coop, as a junior, also had a return touchdown. I'm buying stock in this Arizona wide receiver group. I think all 3 of these guys can rise in the rankings with the senior seasons. Remember, we're only going through the junior years. They all have priority watch tags next to them. I think this is an exciting group. And for Arizona, which lost so much when Jed Frisch left for Washington through the transfer portal. There's reason to be excited about them in the Big 12.
It's not so much, you look at Miami, you look at Florida State. I could see them maybe slow playing a guy like Mizell. UCF and Gus Malzahn, Alex Galesh in South Florida, I'm a little bit surprised that they weren't all over this type of guy. He kind of fits what they want to do. I mean, imagine having this guy as your third or fourth receiver, not putting him in a spot where he's got to be your number one or number two guy, but just a guy that can give you a little bit of verticality, take the top off the defense, and do some things with the ball in his hands as well. I was a little shocked he kind of got out of state, Drew.
I'm just going to say I kind of passed him along to maybe Arizona at some point. And here's the other thing. Coop, I was at a coaching convention at some point, and there was a group of 5 staffer there making a presentation to high school coaches. And he was just kind of explaining how their recruiting board works. And he said to this room full of Sunshine State coaches, hey, look, I get it. You got a 5'10 receiver that's fast and can score touchdowns. Every high school in the state of Florida has one. We're just trying to find the right guy and just talking about, how you want to diversify your wide receiver room. Well, Arizona, they take Mizell and they pair him with a Terry Shelton, right? Who's the complete opposite. Those two complement each other very well.
All right, let's keep Isaiah Mizell in our mind here as we talk about the next program, a point that I kind of want to drive home. So, Drew, if I forget about it, please make sure to remind me. But the last school here that we want to talk about that you wrote about, how about Florida State, currently ranked number 17 in the recruiting rankings right now, Tramel Jones. We've talked about him an exhaustive amount on this podcast. We know what type of player he is out of Mandarin there in Florida. And Drew, I think a guy that I went back, I watched the Elite 11 tape, I watched it in LA, I watched it in Atlanta. I was there for both of those events. You just know what you're getting with Tramel Jones, and a guy that is a super, super high floor, high cognitive player, processes the game very well. And in terms of ball placement and consistency and playing with a small strike zone, that is Tramel Jones. So who is he going to have to throw the ball to in Tallahassee? How about C.J. Wiley, top 247 receiver for us, and on top of that, Dalen McCutcheon as well out of the state of Texas. And C.J. Wiley, Drew, the guy that I continue to study more and more. You've studied a lot, the same with the rest of our team. Going back in, reading the reports this morning, currently ranked number 202, number 22 receiver in the country. A highly, I would say, followed recruitment, right, between Florida State, Georgia, LSU. A lot of people were in on C.J. Wiley, 6'4", 3/4, 209, long, the son of former LSU defensive lineman Chuck Wiley. You see this big frame, got to see him in Charlotte as well, work out over the offseason, a guy that averaged over 21 yards per reception. You talk about getting deep, vertical, using that big frame well to his advantage. That's C.J. Wiley. I think a lot of people are going to look at him, especially if you're in Tallahassee, and say, oh, yeah, this guy's kind of, Keon Coleman-ish. Keon Coleman, kind of one of one, especially at the catch point when you talk about his ability to adjust and win 50-50 balls. C.J. Wiley's a little bit different. He is long. He's over 200 pounds. He's well put together. But you talk about a guy that can really do some things in the deep third and outside the numbers. That's where he operates. It's kind of rare for somebody his size. And then Dalen McCutcheon out of Texas, Drew, a guy that's ranked only just a couple spots behind C.J. Wiley, completely different. 5'11", operates on the outside, 174 pounds, great production, over 1,100 yards receiving. Got a really good track and field resume as well. A lot of wiggle to him, sudden on the inside, can create separation. A guy that I think you have to have a plan for, but nonetheless, Tramel Jones, C.J. Wiley, Dalen McCutcheon, that's a pretty solid trio if you're Mike Norvell.
Yeah, peanut butter and jelly, right? Perfect combo between those two. C.J. Wiley, contested catch, 50-50 guy on the outside. Dalen McCutcheon, someone you can scheme up targets for. Very polished as a route runner. You dig into his workout from a few months ago on the Under Armour Next circuit. I mean, this guy just consistently sets up defensive backs and streaks free underneath. C.J. Wiley, to me, and I wrote this on CBS Sports, Cooper, you think about Florida State, that magical season they had. I know they didn't get into the college football playoff, but they were able to move the ball with these big, large, wide receivers. You said Keon Coleman, but how about Johnny Wilson? C.J. Wiley, to me, he's in that mold. He excels, as you said, attacking leverage, right, and then turning and locating the football. He's 209 pounds. I actually think he's closer to 225 pounds, but he's kind of one of one in this class when we talk about the wide receivers. Picked up the production as the year went on from Milton that won a state title. I just think these two are going to give Mike Norvell plenty to work with. We know he's going to continue to work the transfer portal, but certainly a fun and unique pair in that FSU recruiting class.
So my point on Isaiah Mazzell, and it's not so much about him, and really Dalen McCutcheon. I like Dalen McCutcheon. We have him in the top 247. We think is a guy that would be a 7th-round draft pick. You know, I look at him, I look at the frame a little bit, Drew, and I kind of have some concerns a little. I kind of find it odd that Florida State, who has done a good job at the position, you know, with Keon Coleman, some of the other guys, we'll wait and see what kind of happens with Hakeem Williams, goes to Texas for a player like that. And I'm not taking anything away against Dalen McCutcheon, but just in terms of the level of depth and the level of talent in your home state, you know, it always kind of pops into my mind when you have these conversations with these coaches like, hey, we're leaving the state of Florida that puts out more players than any other state in all of the United States in the NFL when it comes to draft selections. And we're going to go to Texas, which in their own right, they're right there with Florida. It's not even that, but think of all the geography that you have to cover to go get that player and how many players are in between point A to point B from Tallahassee to that point in Texas. I don't know. I just thought there was maybe something a little bit more in Florida State with what they've done, given their track record as of recently, Mike Norvell being a receiver guy, that they could have gone out there and maybe got something a little bit more intriguing, a little bit more size, a little bit more speed. They get a guy that I think ultimately at the end of the day, best case scenario is probably your 3rd best receiver on the roster, best case, and a guy that you have to have a vision for, and he's a little bit more of a utility guy that could potentially give you some team's value. I just thought it was a little bit of a reach, if I'm being frank, and I'm not dinging them. It's just my own opinion on that.
Yeah, Coop, I mean, that's an interesting point. You know, I was talking with Brian Doan this morning, kind of called me about some changes that are potentially coming to the recruiting calendar and how it relates to summer camps. You know, I commend Florida State because they are one of the few programs that is dominating the transfer portal, but at the same time, they're making these high school evaluations, right? They get kids on campus. I believe they're going to have another kind of invite-only camp at the end of the month. Everyone else is doing a barbecue. Florida State says, no, all right, we're going to slap the GPSs on some kids. We're going to work them out. We're going to store that data. You know, I don't really know necessarily, okay, they go to Texas for a wide receiver. I think we're going to get into that later in the show. But for Florida State, man, they seem to be a little bit ahead of the curve when it comes to, okay, right now, the hay is in the barn primarily for that class of 2025. Let's get as many 2026s as we can on campus. And I think more schools are going to need to realize that, all right? This summer, this window right now, you're really laying the groundwork from an evaluation standpoint when it comes to that next recruiting class, the guys going into their junior season. So that's something I noticed with Florida State. I think you bring up a good point. I'll say this, though, Coop. Florida, I mean, guys slip through the cracks. As crazy as it sounds, the top 3 players from South Florida in the EA Sports 2025 college football game, Cooper, not one of them was offered by Florida, Miami, or Florida State. Not one of them was a 4- or 5-star prospect. Guys slipped through.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, in everybody, right? Like Florida, Miami, Florida State, you know, we see it in the NFL as well with us on the ranking side, right? It's like a group level accountability project, but how does this continue to happen? You look up, you see these guys like Quinyon Mitchell getting drafted in the 1st round in the NFL draft, finishing their career out in Toledo. Drew, I believe you had a couple honorable mentions as well, quick hitters, but Oregon, Washington, you want to give some love to as well.
Yeah, Oregon and Washington. Oregon, I mean, Dallas Wilson, you know, guy that moved up in our rankings, obviously DeCorian Moore, the nation's #1 ranked wide receiver. They also got 2 more top 247 wide receivers committed, Isaiah Mosey, Cooper Perry. Washington, Chris Lawson, Raiden Vines Bright. I also love the quarterback they have committed, and Tristan Kinney out of Hawaii, Gatorade Player of the Year there in the nation's 50th state. I call him a flamethrower. You know, this is my list of trios. I get excited about Tristan throwing to those. I think he's a Noah Fafita kind of type player. We know what Jed Fish did. Some other ones I wrote down, Cooper, and I think we need to point out with these trios and with these duos, you know, not all of the big-time wide receivers have come off the board. So there is certainly some runway for these guys to enter the conversation. You know, Notre Dame, what if they pair Derek Meadows with Deuce Knight? Texas, they could get Khalil Lockett, Jaime French, with KJ Lacey. Florida's got Josh Moore, seems to be in a good position for Nell Brown. What do they do at quarterback? And they flip Bryce Baker from UNC. I thought it was a fun exercise at this point. Still some dominoes to fall, but just kind of gives you an idea of who is really recruiting that wide receiver position well, and then pairing it with a high upside quarterback.
All right, guys, just a reminder you are locked into the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel and the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. You can find the Oyster Boys every Tuesday and Wednesday at noon Eastern Time. Make sure to like and subscribe. And the other thing, the benefit that you get watching this show, well, we got Tom Loy in the chat, one of the best in the business, national football recruiting analyst for 24/7 Sports, right here in the chat answering your questions. So if you have a question about a potential recruit of your favorite team that you need to get answered, right now is the time to submit those. Also, if you have a, I would say, more scouting-related question for Andrew or I, you can put that in the chat as well. We will get to that at the end of the show. I also told you we will talk about the former five-star and Colorado one-time standout, Cormani McClain, now with the Florida Gators. A lot of speculation around him. Is he on the team? Is he off the team? We'll get to that later in the show. That would be the last thing we do before we move on. So if you have any interest in that, stick around. We'll get to that. But, Drew, Transaction Wire busy, as always, a little bit more of an abbreviated one, I guess, this weekend. But let's start at the top. How about Nick Townsend from Decaney? We have listed as an athlete, two-way guy. I would say one of the more, I don't want to use polarizing, but, fascinating prospects in the class that we really haven't talked a lot about. He commits to Texas, ranked number 108, the number 3 athlete in the country. Did a little digging earlier this morning, talked to Hudson Standish. It sounds like the Longhorns will play him at tight end, much to my surprise, quite honestly. This is a guy, 11.5 tackles for loss, 8 sacks. Those numbers really don't pop out, but Drew, just in terms of the skill set, I mean, they're playing on ball, off ball, a guy that looks super comfortable in space. I loved his pass rushing upside as well. Don't get it twisted. I think this guy can be a really, really good tight end, especially under Steve Sarkisian and Jeff Banks as well. This was the conversation surrounding a guy of the name Jatavian Sanders from Denton Ryan before he ended up playing tight end for the Longhorns as well. I thought more defense. Texas going to take a shot on offense. Put the swords down. Longhorns getting a good player regardless.
Coop, you know who he reminds me of in terms of like tight end, defensive line? I don't know if you recruited this guy when you were at Oregon, DJ Johnson. Remember him? He ended up at Miami, transferred back to Oregon. It was like tight end. Some people he wanted to be a tight end. Everyone thought he was a defensive lineman. Ended up being a third-round pick in the 2023 NFL draft. I think he's one of those mid-skills you take and you just figure it out later. Not a lot of humans move the way he does at his size. Get him in the boat, figure it out. Steve Sarkisian, he's a creative play caller. I can certainly see him finding ways to get Townsend involved.
Okay, let's move on. We'll stick in the SEC. I got to get used to that. Texas to Georgia. Georgia, Drew, just kind of like quietly over the last couple weeks, I feel like they've just added to their class. And yeah, they haven't been the most high-end targets, but these are still really good quality players. And one of those quality guys out of the state of Florida, how about 4-star safety? Rashad Johnson, ranked the number 24 safety in the country. Drew, you and I have gone back and forth on this kid. 6'2", big kid, ran 11.13, two-way snaps, can play him down in the nickel. I think he kind of projects to that star position for Kirby Smart. I like this kid. You pair him with a guy like Jalen Morgan, who's another position flexible defensive back on the back end there. They've done some really, really nice things. These guys are all kind of the mold where they can play different positions. You can play them in the deep third. You can play them closer to the line of scrimmage. They got the size. They got the speed. They got the athleticism. The versatility here that Georgia is building with their secondary, I mean, I know that's always kind of been a theme, but you got to give Will Muschamp, Kirby Smart a ton of credit for what they're kind of building on that back end.
I love this kid, Coop, and, watched him as a sophomore. Obviously, he's in my region. Watch him as a junior. I popped on the spring game he had back in May. He has figured it out, right? Downhill thumper, someone that has the length to match tight ends on underneath routes. I completely agree, align with you there. I think he's maybe that ideal star. And he is someone, I went back and looked, Cooper, January of 2023, he was 170 pounds. On a visit he was on a few weeks ago, he was 200 pounds. So we talk about, okay, we're in the business of trying to project these guys long term. We're talking about 16, 17, 18-year-olds. They go through physical transformations. Rashad Johnson is one of those guys that has bulked up and can now play in the box in the SEC. This is an under the radar pickup that I absolutely love. I think he's someone that could have a ton of success in that aggressive 3-4 front there in Athens.
It was a lot going on this weekend, obviously, but Drew, in the midst of all that, how about Alabama landing 2 5-stars back-to-back days? We talked about one of these guys at the top of the show. If you're coming in late and you're an Alabama fan, make sure to go back and rewind. We talked a lot about Caleb Cunningham, his fit there in Tuscaloosa. The other guy on the offensive line, we heard this from Keelan Russell, one of the top targets for Alabama, in his quarterback now. Ty Haywood, ranked the number 18 player in the country, number 4 offensive tackle, 6'5", 285. Drew, I've said for quite some time, he kind of reminds me a little bit of Alex Leatherwood, who also played his ball at Alabama, was a first-round draft choice of the Las Vegas Raiders. This kid, quick twitch, explosive, I think everything that you want in a guy that could potentially play early. I don't really see that for Alabama, but if you had to pick one guy that could play early at the next level, I think it would be Ty Haywood. Just the level of ball that he plays. He's strong at the point of attack. He can work up to the next level. He's not as traitsy as a guy like David Sanders, maybe Babalola, but in terms of the floor, Drew, in terms of guys that you feel really, really convicted on, safe on, guys that you know are going to be a really, really good player, I kind of get like a little bit of like Tyler Booker feeling. I don't know if he's going to be a right tackle. I don't know if he's going to end up being a guard. I know this dude is going to be a dude at the end of the day, and that's why Alabama should be excited about it.
Yeah, some position flex. Caleb Cunningham, the other one that picked the Crimson Tide over the weekend, Coop, I had to do a CBS Sports HQ hit on Caleb Cunningham when he announced. It feels like Kalen DeBoer is just recruiting at a Nick Saban level. And I think when it comes to the offensive players, you can make the case that he might be doing it a little bit better. Think about this. As good as Saban was in the 24/7 sports era, only one time did he sign a 5-star quarterback with 2 5-star wide receivers. That was back in 2017 when he got Tua and a few Devontae Smith, Henry Ruggs, all in the same class. Look at this class for Kalen DeBoer, Keelan Russell, Caleb Cunningham, and then if you wanted to include Ryan Williams, that would be a second 5-star wide receiver. I want to ask you this: did you think Kalen DeBoer would be recruiting this well? Because to me, I'm going to come clean. I'm a bit surprised that it's gone this well for him before he's even played one game.
No, the answer to that is no, very clearly. And I'll say this: I think a lot of expectations. I think the biggest question mark on Kalen DeBoer was not can he recruit the South, but can he recruit at a level of Nick Saban we see year after year and what they've done from the player development standpoint, first-round draft choices, leading the SEC in terms of number of NFL selections as well. I think that was the expectation, the questions that a lot of people had around Kalen DeBoer. He brings over Courtney Morgan, highly regarded guy, running his personnel shop over from Washington. And let me be frank, I didn't think they were that good of an operation at UW. So I had a lot of questions when they got to Alabama. I said this on Sunday, talking about Kalen DeBoer in Alabama and Courtney Morgan and their administration. They deserve a ton of credit. And I'm going to give Greg Byrne a ton of credit, the AD there at Alabama. They have let Kalen DeBoer come in to Tuscaloosa and really just kind of acclimate very comfortably to the recruiting surroundings. And quite honestly, Kalen DeBoer's done a tremendous job. You got to give his staff a ton of credit as well. Jamarcus Shepard, some of the other guys on staff, Womack on the defensive side of the ball. They're recruiting with a lot of urgency. My other question is I thought they were going to be a top 10 recruiting program under Kalen DeBoer. Obviously, they're at number 2 right now. They're 3 points behind Ohio State. They got a chance to be number 1. They have more 5-star commits than any other program in the country, over Ohio State, over Georgia as well. They have 10 players ranked inside the top 100. They have 22 commitments. 16 of those guys are inside the top 247. They have done some things, whether it was Nick Saban or Kalen DeBoer. If it was Nick Saban, we'd be sitting here giving Nick Saban a ton of praise for what he's done going into year whatever it was at the end of his tenure. So Kalen DeBoer, his staff, they deserve a ton of credit. I think the other thing is they have taken NIL and they have used it in the correct fashion in how you help and how you aid a first-year head coach in a new environment, and they have put it to extremely good use. And that's not all it is, but they've done a tremendous job. And I think everybody in that organization deserves a ton of credit. So they're always going to have a bullseye on their back. But no, I thought they would be 6 through 10. I thought it would be good. I think people would be happy with it. If you were to tell me that they would be battling for number one, I would say that would be a little bit of a surprise. So credit to them and what they've done. I mean, I think the other thing is, like, you and I looked around and we're like, what are they going to do at quarterback, right? And I think they sniffed around Julian Lewis. I think they sniffed around Deuce Knight. Given Kalen DeBoer's resume and what he's done over the last couple of years with Michael Penix, they go out and get Keelan Russell, best option available. So credit to them and what they've done. And I knew we were going to talk a little bit about Alabama on this show, man, but they have been methodical in a way that I did not expect.
Yeah, because I think the first, 2 months, you were kind of scratching your head and wondering if this was going to work out. I mean, you said you thought they would be 6 to 10 heading into the season. I thought they could have been 10 to 20, 21 to 25. That's how kind of concerned I was. I think I even told you I'm selling stock in Alabama. Now I'm buying it. I'm buying it back at a premium because I really like this recruiting class. And it's not just some of these offensive guys we've talked about, Cooper. It's also what they've done in the secondary. It's also what they've done up front on defense. I'm interested to see how they can close this out. And the other thing is, can they keep it together if maybe the on-field results aren't what we would normally expect from Alabama here in 2024?
To me, what's funny, he hadn't coached a game yet, and like the SEC is going to be a gauntlet. It's going to be tough. I mean, this guy in the last couple of years, head-to-head against Steve Sarkisian and Dan Lanning, both guys that we continuously praise on this show for their roster building and their talent acquisition and their defensive prowess and their offensive prowess alike. Kalen DeBoer hasn't lost a game to either of those guys. So when it comes to coaching, and when it comes to getting the most out of his players, I really do not have a lot of questions when it comes to Kalen DeBoer. This was the biggest question mark, and so far, Drew, I don't want to sound like that skeptic, but so far, I mean, he has aced the test with flying colors. So if you're an Alabama fan, you got to be elated. Can he keep it up? That's now going to be the new question. But so far, so good, and we'll see what happens this season on the field. But I think that's the easy part. I think Kalen DeBoer and his staff feel very confident about what they bring to the table, especially when it comes to X's and O's. All right, Drew, let's round this transaction wire out. Travis Smith, top 247 receiver, top 150 prospect. He commits to Tennessee out of the state of Georgia. Also another receiver off the board, Dalen Upshaw out of the state of Alabama. High 3-star commits to Miami. Your thoughts on Travis Smith to the Vols?
I like the idea of him in that Josh Heupel offense. You think about him, kind of prototypical X, over 6'3", 200 pounds. He's got ready-to-play size. I have a burning, lasting image in my eyes of seeing him at the Under Armour camp in Atlanta back in February. It was me, you, Hudson Stanich. This guy is rocked up in the lower half, which is surprising to me because Travis Smith is someone I saw at the FBU Freshman All-American game like 2 or 3 years ago, and he was kind of a beanpole, so he has added a bunch of weight. I think he is someone that allows that offense to go. Really like the pickup there. I want to hear you on Dalen Upshaw to Miami because I know the folks in Coral Gables are fired up about that addition, and he is someone that you've continued to bring up. Played opposite of Cam Coleman last season, but still had over 1,000 yards receiving.
I thought the recruitment was interesting. You saw Miami, you saw Auburn, you saw Tennessee, I believe, ended up being the top 3 for Dalen Upshaw. This is a guy that I think can play on the perimeter, but he's really a Z. I think you can move him around. I love his position flex. I love what he can do. I love his ability to operate out of the slot as well. I think the biggest thing that you talked about, Drew, he played opposite of Cam Coleman. And this guy, just in terms of the production, what he did last year was right there as a guy that eclipsed over 1,100 yards receiving as well. So I like the versatility. I like kind of how he fits in a Shannon Dawson offense. You think about a guy like Xavier Restrepo and the production that he had last year under the first year of a new offensive coordinator and what this guy can be. I just like kind of the we talk about position flex all the time, but I like the different things that you can do. You can kind of utilize him out of the backfield if you want to do that. You can play him on the perimeter. You can move him inside. I think this is going to be a really, really good complement to what they're building in that receiving core. JoJo Trader, guys like that. this guy's going to be an ideal fit, super high floor player, expect him on the field sooner than later. And, liked what I saw from him in Atlanta, and certainly another guy that we're going to watch during his senior season. Travis Smith, I want to bring back up, this is not a clean comp, more of a comp from, all right, one speed type of guy. That's kind of the way I see him, kind of lives outside the number, good 50-50 pass catcher. Ramel Keaton kind of comes to mind a little bit. Ramel was kind of more of a long strider and a guy that was kind of more of a down the field, outside the numbers kind of playmaker. That's kind of what I see with Travis Smith a little bit. So Tennessee, nice pickup. You pair him with guys like Mike Matthews, the other kid out of North Carolina that we ended up liking a couple years ago. Dude, they have just piled on that position at the receiver position for Josh Heupel. So there you have it. The abbreviated transaction wires we go through every Tuesday with some of the top names in the country coming off the board. Be sure to follow 24/7 Sports, updated commitments to follow all of that as well. Guys, like I said, Tom Loy is in the chat. What a luxury for us. If you have questions, especially on the recruiting end, make sure to get those questions in to Tom. If you have questions more on the scouting end related to that, how we see players, where guys might fit, how does it kind of correlate to the rankings process, make sure to get those in as well. Andrew and I will do our best to answer those questions. Drew, some of the news following Big 12 Media Day and Commissioner Brett Yormark, who, shoot, man, the more I learn about him, kind of seems more like a mad scientist, quite honestly. Florida State and Clemson in the ACC, it seems like all the scuttlebutt right now is that there's a pretty good chance Florida State and Clemson could potentially move to the Big 12. And they wouldn't be the only ones in the ACC. Some of the other schools in that conference have been linked. But let's stick with Florida State and Clemson. Drew, you and I talked a couple weeks ago about the Big 12 and the opportunity abound in the Big 12. Like, if you look at the Big 12 right now in recruiting, TCU leads at number 22. And then you have, I believe, I got to go back and look at this. Was it Colorado at number 24? Could be wrong there.
No, UCF at 24.
UCF.
Baylor.
I don't know why I put CU. I'm sorry. UCF at number 24. I knew that wasn't right in my head. A Petagna flag there. So you have TCU, you have Central Florida at number 24. Point in case being, the Big 12 is wide open, and there it is right there on your screen. The current Big 12 rankings as they stand right now. But in terms of like who is a dominant power when it comes to recruiting in the Big 12, there isn't one. Is there a superpower? There isn't one. Here's the other thing. Florida State and Clemson. Clemson's sitting at 16. Florida State's sitting at 17. You brought up the point. Florida State has made a living via the transfer portal, and they've done a good job kind of complementing their roster via high school. They don't really live in the high school ranks. They're a little inverted. Clemson, on the other hand, is a fascinating situation. They don't use the transfer portal. You see them striking out with guys like David Sanders. They're kind of in an identity crisis right now as they try to figure out what's the next step from an NIL standpoint. They're sitting there, still one of the better scouting programs in the country, but they're sitting there at 16. I think a lot of Clemson fans would argue, I think Dabo Swinney would even argue that there's a lot of meat left on the bone. They're going to trust the process. They're going to say all the right things. Florida State and Clemson, if they were to join the Big 12, Drew, I think there's a clear gap between them and everybody else in that conference when it comes to recruiting. How is it going to change their strategy if those two programs end up moving to the ACC? I really don't think much. I just think this is kind of like musical chairs. The Big Ten and the SEC aren't taking anybody else. I don't think they get any clear advantage by moving to the Big 12 other than being now in the third super conference in terms of the way that college football is moving. I just think it's kind of business as usual. And the way that it falls right now, I think Clemson and FSU are going to be ahead of the pack, and really what's kind of like a void of just kind of like who is the guy, who is the team in the Big 12. There's nobody stepping up into that. There's teams like Houston that we like what UCF is doing, but in terms of a program recruiting in the top 10 every year, even in the top 15, I couldn't give you one.
Well, I think it would certainly create a third, you said it, super conference, right? You can make a case maybe it's an easier path to the college football playoff. But I think as a whole, they joined the Big 12. What does that do for every other program in the Big 12? To me, like in my mind, I think about that UCF job, Gus Malzahn's there. Who knows how much longer he's going to be there. But how much more attractive would a UCF be? How much more attractive would, a TCU, some of these other schools. I think the other thing, Cooper, the Big 12's footprint from like a recruiting perspective, you would have 4 schools in the state of Texas, 2 in the state of Florida, right? FSU and UCF. Then you would have 2 in Arizona. Those are some of the most talent producing regions when it comes to NFL draft picks year in and year out. In Arizona, that football continues to improve. So I like the idea of the Big 12 trying to get more involved in the Sunshine State, right? That's going to allow these teams around the country, the Utahs, right, the Kansas States, the Kansases, to have more access to Florida athletes. I think if you're a Florida State fan, right, you're a Clemson fan, what does this mean for us? Maybe it helps you in Texas, right? We've seen both programs involved there. I think Florida State has signed, 3 guys over the past 3 cycles out of the Lone Star State. Clemson a little bit more with 7, obviously Cade Klubnik being one of them. I don't know what this move really means. I think you're right. I mean, those 2 would be the clear-cut favorites, but this would be a program development league, and I think we could get on board big time. I mean, Lance Leipold at Kansas, Chris Kleiman at K-State, Billy Fritz at Houston, Matt Campbell at Iowa State, Sonny Dykes at TCU. Those guys turn water into wine based on what they've been able to do in terms of getting guys. And then now you're tossing Mike Norvell into the mix with Dabo Swinney. I think it could kind of close the gap in terms of NFL players per capita in each conference with the SEC in the Big Ten.
All right, let's assume hypothetically that Clemson and Florida State do move into the Big 12. There's been rumors about a couple other schools maybe jumping to the Big 12 with them. I would probably think you're looking at Virginia Tech, maybe North Carolina, maybe Miami. What does that kind of look like? I feel like we would have heard more about Miami. But at this point, let's just assume it's those 2 schools. Outside of Miami, because we know what Mario Cristobal is about, and we know obviously the geographical advantage of being in the state of Florida, like what school in the ACC has the most to gain over the next 5 to 10 years?
In that new look ACC?
Correct.
What about Georgia Tech? Given how they're recruiting as of late under Brent Key, I think they are in Atlanta. You want to talk about region. How many flights go into that airport? It's one of the biggest airports in the world, right? You are in the hotbed. You can get into Alabama. You can get into Georgia. You can get into Florida. You can get into Tennessee. That's all obtainable in terms of prospects you can recruit. So to me, Georgia Tech is one that certainly jumps out. And I think SMU as well. SMU on pace to have their best recruiting class ever in the 24/7 sports era there under Rhett Lashley. I think they're another one to certainly think about.
Yeah, SMU comes to mind. That was my first thought. And I wonder how they would feel about that. Now all of a sudden you lose the 2 powers to potentially the Big 12, but it kind of opens the door, right, for what a potential kind of CFP run would look like in that conference as well. You got Miami, Virginia Tech, Brent Pryce still kind of building it over there, Stanford, and Coach Taylor still trying to figure it out. So ACC would be wide open. We'll see what happens there. We'll keep our ear to the ground. As of right now, a lot of momentum, it seems like Florida State and Clemson to the Big 12. We'll see how that shakes out. We said in the beginning of the show that we would talk about former 5-star and Colorado signee Cormani McClain out of the state of Florida. Now with the Florida Gators, there was a lot of conversation about this, Drew. Super interesting kind of timeline, how everything worked out, his recruitment going all the way back to the high school days, how he handled that, what that looked like. Florida ends up taking a shot on Cormani McClain. And Drew, some reports this morning that he's no longer with the team. It seems as of now that is not the case. Defensive back coach Will Harris has come out and refuted that and said that is not true on X. So we got a little bit of confirmation there on Cormani McClain. That being said, Drew, I've checked in. I've done a little bit of digging. I know you have as well. The reports on Cormani McClain is that he's dancing on thin ice, and it's been a little bit more of the same. What we heard at Colorado, lack of work ethic, lack of accountability, not showing up to meetings in terms of winning over the trust of his teammates and his new coaching staff. It sounds like that has not been going well. I know they had a plan for him. I know they had a vision. I don't want to ask you if you're surprised or if you're shocked because I got a pretty good feel on what that answer would be. But I don't know. It seems like at this situation, if that's getting out, we'll see. Maybe it's a wake-up call for Cormani McClain. But, is this something that you want kind of hovering around your program before you play Miami week 1 in the most pivotal year of your tenure if you're Billy Napier? That's the way I see it. Like, do you want this cloud to follow you into the season if this is the way that it's going to continue to trend?
Oh, Coop, go back in our feed when Cormani made his decision to transfer to Florida, and that's exactly what we said. You're welcoming this huge distraction, and it's playing out not how you wanted it to, right? You're about to start preseason camp. You said this is a pivotal season for Billy Napier. What was the here to gain? I don't know. I thought I questioned it from the jump. Boots on the ground here in the Sunshine State. Like I said, your casual Florida fan, they all know who Cormani McClain is. They probably can't even name the other 2 starting corners, but they know Cormani. And I just think it's a big distraction. So we'll see. Unfortunate situation. Am I surprised? You already know the answer. No, I'm not surprised that these reports are coming out that, he's late to workouts or not showing up to workouts. It didn't seem like the right move for Billy Napier, who's so calculated with everything else that he does.
We'll keep an eye on Cormani McClain, what happens with him. Florida obviously got their hands full right now, and we'll see if this plays out over the next couple months and if he's on the team come September when the Gators face the Canes. All right, Drew, with that being said, I think it's time for some questions, and a good one right off the bat from our friend Andrew. We'll start with Kanan Torres. Kanan, hopefully I got your name right. He said, love the pod. Who fits better in a Colin Klein type of scheme for A&M, Jerome Miles or Kalik Lockett? Just so you guys know, Kalik Lockett, Jerome Miles, both those guys ranked inside the top 32, both those guys that we like a lot. Good question, and one, Drew, quite honestly, I tried to wrap my head around it. I didn't really come to a clear answer. I think you could go either way. I think the one that I tried to think about, like, all right, let's look at the quarterback room a little bit and what guy kind of pairs the best with Hassan Longstreet. And I went back and forth. I think Jerome Miles is more of a guy that can stretch the field, play in the deep third, which is where Hassan Longstreet lives. That's kind of who he is. The other one, I think about short to intermediate, winning outside the numbers, big catch radius, big frame, gives you a big target. And for a guy like Longstreet, who's really got one speed, he's a fastball thrower, he's got to develop there. I think a guy like Lockett probably makes a little bit more sense. And that's kind of, I'm splitting hairs, but I didn't think there was like a concise answer either way. Great question.
5-star question. Can we review questions? I love this one. Got my mind churning as well. Went back to Colin Klein last season at Kansas State. His offense leading receiver was a tight end, Ben Sinnett, who ended up being a second-round pick. He led the team in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. The 2 receivers outside of that, J.C. Brown, a true freshman who came on late on the smaller side, probably comps more to a Kalik Lockett. So naturally, I was like, okay, Kalik Lockett would be the answer here. But having been around Kalik Lockett, having been around Jerome Miles fits Mike Elko in the culture they are trying to establish there. Cooper, Jerome Miles doesn't turn 16 until next week. He is 15 years old right now. He's 6'0", 3'0", 218, 10.36 speed. This is a kid that broke his ankle early on in the junior season, returned in the playoffs, caught a few touchdowns in the state title game. He's tough, he's big, he's physical. I just think pairing him with Hassan Longstreet, with Keoti Armstrong, with Marcus Garcia and the rest of those offensive linemen, I think the identity for the Aggies on the offensive side of the ball, it's going to be this big power, physical spread. And I think Jerome Miles, who again, already over 215 pounds, would fit in perfectly. You can't go wrong with either of these two, but to me, Jerome is the one I'd be all about if I, was part of the 12th man. And I also think Kalik Lockett, pretty similar in some ways to Tristan Norman in terms of the size and the build. So adding some different body types to that wide receiver room.
Kind of wild. He's 15 years old. I can't remember the last time we had a guy entering his senior season 15 years old and a guy that we had ranked inside the top 32 that we like a lot as well. So, Drew, the next question here from Andrew, he says, how do you grade players like Dimitri Manning for the Ducks, a 3-star that runs the wing tee, might not throw a pass in his college career? It's got to be near impossible. Dimitri Manning, for those of you that don't know, is a guy that we have ranked as a highly rated 3-star, currently committed to Dan Lanning in Oregon. And I talked about him. I mean, like one of the biggest bodies I've seen just in terms of mass. 6'4", 6'6 and a half, 345 pounds. Actually carries it well. And to Andrew's point, does play an offense that does not showcase his ability as a pass protector. I think the biggest thing on this question is, Dimitri Manning, more than likely, everything we see, not only on the game tape, but all the information off of it as well. Long arms, almost a 7-foot wingspan. Could he potentially play tackle in the right scheme? Yes, I think he could, but he'd be a right tackle. I think where Oregon sees him, Malik Terry and Will Stein, is more than likely on the inside. This is a guy that uses his size exceptionally well. Put him in a phone booth. Don't make him kind of think about playing on the perimeter, foot, body quickness. Let him get his hands on you. Let's play power football, get north-south. That's kind of Dimitri Manning. He's a big refrigerator that you want in the middle that's really going to anchor your run game. So that's the way we see Dimitri Manning. I think, it's a hard part to deal with. Okay, how does this guy kind of project from a pass protection standpoint? But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you feel like he can anchor and he's got enough athletic ability to him and you think he's going to be on the inside, you got a pretty good idea of what he's going to be like.
And just to add, I mean, we always talk about these Under Armour Next camps, right? We subscribe to the UC report, same thing that all these Power 4 programs are doing around the country. That is one of we couldn't do this job without it, because Dimitri Manning, perfect example. You said it, he's tackle in this. But when we get that Under Armour Next footage, we're able to see him, okay, he's working some pass sets. How does he move through the bags? What does his body type look like? How does he move in positional drills? And I highlighted him as kind of like a sneaky good commit of the week when he picked the Ducks last month, because I love the potential fit for him in there at Oregon on the inside. And he's actually a guy he moved up in the rankings, right? Because we had that junior footage and then we paired it up. Okay, what does he look like in this camp setting? We're more on board with the idea of him being an interior offensive lineman. So great question. And really, he's a great example because of that secondary exposure point, seeing him in a different type of setting and ultimately trying to make that projection.
All right, we got the OGs in the chat. Kane's Cat 305, he asked, for the class of 2026, which positions are down for the cycle and which positions have the most beef this early? Drew, I think that's more of a you question, a little bit more acquainted with the class of 2026. I feel like we've talked about this before, but are there any positions that you kind of look at and say, that one's thin, this one's got, I would say a platitude of guys?
Yeah, I mean, we are actually digging right back into 2026 rankings now, without really having much preparation for this. I think we had this question a few weeks ago. I think cornerback, kind of looking for some of those individuals, can be a late blooming type of developmental position. I think there's some questions about, CB1, CB2, CB3, CB4, CB5. Like, who are those elite guys that check boxes in terms of the height, weight, speed, the prototypical corners? Right now, Justice Fitzpatrick's our number one ranked corner. He's sitting, I think, 31 in the rankings. So that's one where I think it's a little down. Now, position I really like, I think there's some premium edge rushers out there. When we expanded to that top 247, I came across a lot of guys where it's like, okay, this dude has a chance, right? We need a little bit more information here, but he looks to be long enough and he can get around the edge. He can bend and close on quarterbacks. I think it's good at edge rusher. The quarterbacks, we got a really good taste of them at the Future 50 event. I think at the top of the board, there are certainly some dudes, and it's unfortunate if your school doesn't have one of these guys on board, but I do think, we feel good about, a dozen or so quarterbacks, and that's saying a lot, as most of these guys have only started 1 year of high school football. So the quarterback position, and then the last one, running back, Gabe Brooks on our team, he kind of wrote about this. It could be an epic cycle in the Lone Star State for ball carriers. And there's some other guys sprinkled around the country who we like a lot as well. I think there's a lot of good running backs out here. And, we try not to hype up the running backs, but there are some guys that I certainly like as well.
All right, Drew, let's get you out on this. During the show, Tom Loy, who's in the chat right now answering your questions, fired in a crystal ball for a 5-star and a top 247 prospect, Jared Smith, out of Thompson High School in Alabama. Cristobal goes in for the Auburn Tigers right now. Drew, your thoughts on Jared Smith. I know you got to see a little bit over the spring.
Yeah, I mean, guy that's we always say this with Jared Smith, right? Go through all the data we have on him from his freshman to his sophomore to his junior years. I mean, not much has changed. He's been that size. He's had that long of arms. He's tested eerily similar all 3 years, and you've just been waiting for it to click on the field. His spring game played him more of a stand-up outside linebacker role. Didn't get a ton of drives, but I thought it was the best and the most encouraging stuff that Jared Smith has been able to put on tape. You got to have a vision for him. Guy, you're going to need to put in the crock pot, right? Coach him up, allow him to get the body right. He's got the measurables, but he's got to develop that play strength. He's got to bulk up. He's going to need to get in a squat rack. But the ceiling is through the roof. And I think for Auburn, given how they've recruited at that edge rusher position, how they've recruited over the past few cycles, they've turned it around there. And Jared Smith, he might not be a year 1, year 2, or even year 3 guy, but certainly someone you can roll the dice on because there is a big payout if it all comes together. All
right, buddy. Let's get out of here on that. Any final thoughts before we get ready for tomorrow's show?
Are you getting the system? Are you?
I'm not.
Is that in the?
I'm not. I don't think I have the cachet to do it. Honestly, I think I gotta do it at work or whatever. I gotta find another place to do it. I'm early on in marriage, dude. I'm not trying to risk it. I don't know. You?
Well, it's like,
are you pulling the trigger?
You kind of also marinate. You're like, oh, I could get like a new driver or this system.
Yeah, I'm done with golf too. So all the hobbies that I used to like, they're dead to me now. Guys, we appreciate you watching. For Andrew Ivins, I'm Cooper Petagna. One last reminder: make sure to smash that like button. We appreciate you watching. We will be back tomorrow. Like I said, the Oyster Boys tomorrow, 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. We'll see you then.